why don't you go, get on a bus and go to Mississippi and see if you can figure out what's going on. Now, Ella Baker had networks of connections in Mississippi through her earlier work with the NAACP. The famous one, of course, is Medgar Evers. And now, everyone in Mississippi knows that. If you've flown in and out of Jackson, you've flown in and out of Evers International. This is a picture of Medgar Evers coming out of the service. A lot of black men in this state served in the Second World War, came out of that experience, ready to challenge white supremacy in unprecedented ways. And here he is, a photo 20 years later, not even 20 years later, 15 years later, in his office as president of the Mississippi State chapter of the NAACP. But the main person, Ella Baker, she had this, this old list of people she worked with in the local branches. The main person she sent him to was not Medgar Evers, but somebody you've never heard of, named Amzie Moore. Amzie Moore, and again, not a coincidence, had served in the Second World War. Here's Amzie older. Amzie Moore was AMZIE. Amzie Moore lived in Cleveland, Mississippi. Was a member of the local chapter of the NAACP. He was a member of another organization now almost completely forgotten, the Southern Regional Council of Negro Leadership. Like a lot of these guys, he was tough as hell. He was smart. People who worked in the movement used to say that Amzie, who had very little formal education, was able to talk and argue with anybody about anything. He owned a gas station in Cleveland, Mississippi, in the heart of the Delta. And he had at various times already run into challenges from authorities because he refused to Jim Crow his back. I mean, that may not seem like much, but it's an act of extraordinary courage. In fact, the Southern Council of Negro Leadership, Southern Regional Council of Negro Leadership, actually started a campaign where they even had bumper stickers that said, "Don't buy gas where you can't use the restroom." Because of that, he was at risk. The house, we can perhaps stop by it when we go through the Delta. There are floodlights all around his house. And often at night, particularly if there were civil rights workers there, he would just sleep or sit by the window while others were sleeping with a gun. Amzie Moore had been involved in the late 40s and early 50s with attempts to register black people to vote. So when Bob Moses showed up at his door and said, well, see, we want to build this stuff, and we want to try to get the citizens going here, Amzie said to him, you know what, I'm fine with this. I admire what you guys are doing, but that's not what I'm interested in. He said, what's at stake here, if we're going to bring real change, we need to be able to vote. You can sit at a lunch counter, but as long as the governor, the senators, the state representatives, the mayor, the sheriff, the justice of the peace, the county supervisors, the agricultural extension officers, as long as every single one of them is white and part of the apparatus of white supremacy, we're not going to get anywhere. We're a majority of people living in the Delta. If we can register people to vote, we can bring real change. Bob Moses, in reflecting on this later, and we've given you in your packet a short excerpt from his autobiography, a partial autobiography. That never occurred to him. Voting. In fact, a lot of the students weren't very interested when he went back. In fact, Amzie went back to the second SNCC meeting to make the pitch for voting registration. A lot of the students said, oh no, we're not into that. That's the establishment. That's the system. We're revolutionaries. We're laying our bodies on the line. in these sit-ins and in these freedom rides. But it was this older generation and their encounter with this younger generation and the conversations that took place between them and the willingness of both to listen to one another. That's an important part of this story too. We live in a society where the wisdom of young people and the wisdom of old people are very rarely brought into the same room. That became part of the energy that out of which SNCC grew. Ultimately, after a big fight in SNCC, and every discussion involved days of argument with SNCC involved, there was a decision that, okay, SNCC would have two wings. It would have the direct action wing, which would continue with things like the sit-in and the freedom rides, but it would also have a voter registration. Now, I must say, part of the reason why a lot of students were skeptical about, do we really want to bother with voting, isn't that the establishment, was also had to do with the response of the Kennedy administration. The response of the Kennedy administration was ecstatic. Great. No one will object if people want to vote. So this will stop people from getting beaten up and blowing up buses. It will get all of this civil rights stuff off the front pages. And people will just go on and vote, and no one could possibly object to that. Well, in Mississippi, they sure could object to that. And it quickly became clear that in Mississippi, voting, trying to vote, was itself a form of direct action, and one that could indeed get you killed. Well, AMSI ultimately concluded that he was not yet, in the region he was, they were not yet prepared to begin to launch a voter registration drive. It was just too violent. But somehow word of this had gotten out to the media, and Jet magazine, a black magazine, ran a story about the new voter registration campaign that was starting through AMSI Ward, Mississippi. So AMSI got a call from one of these other tough old pine nuts. This man, C.C. Bryant, a railroad man, worked on the Illinois Central from Macomb, Mississippi. Also somebody who had been involved in the NAACP. And he said, I hear you've got a voter registration movement going, bring them down here. So AMSI said to Bob Moses, that's a much older Bob Moses, C.C. Bryant, did any of you know him? He passed about 5 years ago. Bob Moses went down to Macomb, and Macomb became the first place in the state where SNCC began a project. This is a voting registration demonstration in Macomb, Mississippi. Stephen, Fortenberry, the test must go. It's not our Stephen Fortenberry. It must have been the registrar of voters in Macomb at that time. Now, some of you live in Macomb, Mississippi. You probably wouldn't think of this as the most likely place to build a political movement. You probably wouldn't think of this as a community rife with powerful, wise, indigenous leaders. But in the SNCC organizing philosophy, Macomb would become an absolutely crucial site. This is a person, some of you may know him as well. There he is, young. This is him now. He's actually not from Pike County. He's from across the county line in a place so small it's not on the map, called Chisholm. Hollis Watkins. Hollis Watkins was a high school kid. He went to school in Summit. And he was the first local teenager to come and join the movement. He'd read somewhere that these stories, different versions of the story, that either Martin Luther King or Martin Luther King's brother or the Freedom Riders or somebody was at Macomb. So he showed up. Hollis is still an activist in the state of Mississippi. So more sort of, I could set the stage at Macomb a little bit longer, but let me just now talk briefly about one particular event that became very important to learn more about later today. So while SNCC in Macomb was doing voter registration, slow, patient work, trying to get people to be willing to go down to the courthouse, try to register. Often that meant, you know what the courthouse was like, right? And walking into the county clerk's office in front of God and the world. Everybody knew what you were doing. Hollis and some other young people who joined the movement, they were less interested in this. They were more interested in the direct action wing. So Macomb had a direct action wing as well. They called it the Pike County Nonviolent Direct Action. And actually a group of them, some 20 of them, decided that they were going to go sit in at the city library. It would have been the first sit-in in Mississippi. He tells a hilarious version of this story because they hadn't done their homework. Well, first of all, two things happened. One was, of the 20, on the day the sit-in was supposed to happen, only 2 of them showed up. Because they told their parents what they were going to do. And their parents said absolutely not, because they knew what would happen to them if they tried. Hollis says he didn't tell it. He didn't lie to his parents, he just left out certain information. But the other thing, and he tells a very funny version of this story, the library was closed. They hadn't done their homework. So he and this other guy went down to the bus station, sat in the waiting room, and were arrested. That, again, threw down a challenge to other black students. And here's another person some of you may know, a woman from Macomb named Brenda Travis, as a young woman today. So Brenda Travis and some of her friends then went back down to the train station, and they were arrested as well. And by this time, the authorities of Macomb were a bit uneasy, and they called in the principal of the local black high school, of Bergman High School, and they said, shut this down. So Brenda Travis was expelled from the school, and all other students were required to sign a pledge that they would not participate in any sit-ins. In response to that, the students of Bergman High School in 1961 walked out. And we're going to learn about this because we're going to meet today one of the witnesses and participants in that Bergman walkout. And it said something very interesting about SNCC. The students then walked to the SNCC headquarters, which were over a laundry, over a corner store and laundry. What was it, grocery store? And they basically said, are you coming? To the people who were in the SNCC office. That's an interesting moment, right? Most of the SNCC organizers thought this was a disastrous idea. What the students were going to do, they were going to march downtown. And there was no question that there was going to be an enormous conflagration. It seems to the organizers of SNCC to be reckless. They also recognized that their attempts to work with adults in the community were not going to get anywhere if those adults thought that the lives of their children were being jeopardized by this. But if your vision of political leadership is not, I will tell all of these people what they need to do, but I will try to nurture those people's capacity to speak for themselves, and I will listen when they do. Then you do what the people in that SNCC office did, which was march downtown. Well, there was indeed an enormous conflagration. Some people were assaulted. 102 people were arrested. Hollis Watkins, who was at that time over 18, was charged and actually convicted before the conviction was overthrown with 102 counts of contributing to the delinquency of a minor, sentenced to 2 years consecutive on each count. That sentence was overturned. And that was the Berglund walkout. You'll hear more about it. Now I want to talk a little bit about white responses.